Ladies and gentlemen, the tiny DevOps guy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Tiny DevOps, where we talk about dev and ops and all things related for small companies and small teams. So I'm really excited today to have Ola Ellnestam, who is the author of a book that I've really enjoyed. The book has been out for several years, so this isn't the most timely interview, perhaps, but it's still a good book, and I'm really excited to have Ola on today. Ola, welcome.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. It's an honor, and I think maybe it's very timely. I don't know, sort of picking up where everyone seems maybe forgotten about the method. I don't know.
Maybe so. So the book is called The Mikado Method, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But before we do that, Ola, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? What do you do professionally that maybe led up to writing this book almost a decade ago?
Okay. I'm a software developer with passion for working together with others. I've been sort of trying or attempting to coach people on several sort of layers of an organization. Technical coach in a small team, coaching several teams, and also coaching C-level roles. But over and over again, I come back to what I really enjoy the most, which is programming. And I think it's sort of the craft and creating something from an idea and then giving it back to the person who sort of had the idea and see how the reaction in their eyes when a problem is solved automatically for them.
So let's talk about this book. The book is called The Mikado Method. Do you want to introduce it? Maybe what the method is in a couple of sentences, and then we'll dive in a little bit.
Well, it's a structured way of reorganizing your code, basically, and it's a strong emphasis on experiments and visualization. You start out with you want to achieve something, and maybe that's not possible in your first try when you code. And okay, what I need to do something beforehand, something that's in my way. You can also describe it as a to-do list on steroids.
I like that.
Yeah.
So I read the book probably 2016 or 17. I think it was published in 2014, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so too.
And I've used aspects of the method in a lot of my daily work since then. I don't. So there's a visualization aspect of drawing a Mikado. Could you call it a chart? I think.
Yeah, graph or chart,
diagram.
Yeah, diagram. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't usually do that. I do that when I'm teaching the method to other people, but when I'm using it myself, I usually just kind of keep it visual, and it just sort of serves as a reminder to keep my iterations short and small and keep in mind my next steps so I don't forget what I'm doing. But do you want to maybe walk us through briefly, not in so much detail that nobody has to buy the book, but in just enough detail that somebody wants to buy the book? What does the Mikado Method tell us to do? How do we accomplish this?
Well, first of all, you need something that you want to accomplish. We call that a goal. And usually when I program, I'm trying to sort of achieve it in the fastest, easiest, simplest possible way. But very often something gets in the way. You need to move a method, you need to move a class, you need to move a library, you need to upgrade a third-party library or something like that. And then you're in trouble. And then it's very easy for you to lose track of what you're doing. So what I found is that I need to remind myself of what am I doing, and how am I supposed to get there is another problem. So I immediately write down the goal on a piece of paper or a whiteboard, and then I try to achieve the goal in the simplest possible way. And something hinders me, I add a bubble or a node to the graph, and I draw an arrow there. And then I try to and then I revert the code or see what's in my way. And then after that, I try to sort of achieve that goal or the sub goal or a sub prerequisite, we call it.
Hmm.
And after that, after a while, you're usually, most often I do this in my head as you described, but
Yeah.
after a while or sometimes it's hard to keep track of what I was doing, so I need to look at a piece of paper, or otherwise I'm lost. So essentially, it's a map over what you desire most in the world when it comes to your code. And the Mikado method is a structured way of exploring that map.
I like it. Yeah, that's a good description. How did you come up with the name?
Uh,
What does the Mikado method mean?
it's the Mikado is a game. The European version of the pick up sticks game. I think it was under that brand. So we were at a conference, me and Daniel, and we were talking about a way how we sort of beheaded a software beast. After the talk, Laurent Bossavy came up to us. He's a French guy, very in the agile and XP world, and he came up to us and said, "Well, I see there's a method here. There's a this is a structured way, and also you should name it because methods have a name, and it reminds me of the pick up sticks game, which is branded as Mikado in Europe,
Okay.
at least the early versions. So we thought about it, and yeah, well, it's a good analogy because the Mikado, the emperor stick, is always at the bottom, and you want to sort of reach that stick and get the most points out of it, so to speak.
Right.
So that's the sort of metaphor, the analogy.
Nice. Um, I've also I don't know. I imagine you've heard of this if you follow the literature or whatever. But I think Kent Beck mentioned a method he calls test and commit or revert,
Yeah.
which has some similarities to the Mikado method. What do you think about that and the similarities there?
Well, you sort of touched at it in the beginning here. I really enjoy it. It's uh, it's how I sort of evolved to. I sort of have a small Mikado graph in my head nowadays, and I do that. I try something. If it works, I commit it, and sort of make sure it works beforehand. Sort of run the tests or whatever I want to do, and then I commit it, and then I push it to the sort of central repository using Git usually, and then I do another experiment, try that out, and which is that's the smallest cycle of the Mikado method, you could say. So it's very similar, and it's um, it's a style of programming that I enjoy the most, and I feel very secure doing it. So very small Mikado iterations in my head. At first, when I saw I think Kent expressed it in a tweet or so. I was like,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, that's it.
All right, good. Are you a TDD practitioner?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
am. From time to time, I'm very strict uh, about the TDD. Sometimes I do test after. Sometimes I do a big test, integration test. But I need super fast feedback. I feel very insecure without the fast feedback. I get bored. I get lost. I need something to rely on. I need something to sort of rest upon, and that's usually tests.
Hmm. How do you feel about somebody trying to do the Mikado method without doing TDD? I mean, in other words, is it a prerequisite? Or do they go
No,
together, or can you do one without the other?
yeah, you can do one without the other. It's not a prerequisite. It's fun though to see people getting the idea of small experiments. That's what gives me the most pleasure when people's like they've been working so long, like 4 or 5 hours, and it's like trying to push something into the repository, and then they realize, but we're we don't know what we're doing,
Yeah.
and I feel that way very often too. So, but the revert. it's so liberating. It's like cleaning out your garage. It's like, whew,
Yeah,
whew, I can't imagine like pushing that to the repository. Yeah, I'm very glad we reverted this.
yeah. You just touched on a feeling I have had many times. I don't have a specific example, but I can definitely remember times when I've been working on something that led to something that led to something that led to something, and I have like this 6 different generations of change in my editor,
Yeah,
and they're all live, and I don't know which one broke the thing.
yeah. I had that yesterday, but
Oh
I
no.
knew I had committed, and I reverted, and still the test failed. And I was so frustrated. It was like getting way past 6 o'clock yesterday evening. I wanted to go home, and then I was like, "This worked 5 minutes ago. Did another revert?" I was like, "No, no, you're in the reverted state already." And then I refreshed Eclipse, and it's like, "Okay, it was Eclipse this time." But because I could have chased that ghost for, I don't know, well over 1 hour if I hadn't had that commit.
hmm I would like to hear from you if you have some examples of a time, maybe on a personal project or maybe with a team you've been coaching, where the Mikado method made a difference. Do you have a story you could tell us about that?
I have two stories. I wish Daniel was here to tell sort of the best one, but I can try it. It's not very sort of it's not a wow story really, but it just shows how effective the Mikado method can be. Daniel and a colleague, he was working at a internet gaming company, a poker company or something. I don't know what they were doing to. I think they were trying to replace configuration with code or doing it was a huge restructuring, and they drew up the goal and then explored the sort of the Mikado graph, created the map, and then they rehearsed every step on the way. So they had the map, and they before they did the sort of the most critical change or restructuring, they had rehearsed it for well over a week. And then when they finally did it, they were so certain that they had done the correct thing. So they were able to pull it off in under a day. Probably a restructuring that would have taken them, I don't know, maybe the same time to do, but the aftermath was nothing compared to what you usually experience when you do a huge restructuring or well over 10,000 lines of codes affected, and
Wow.
so that's a real. I enjoy it every time when Danny tells it, and he tells it a lot better. But it's I can sort of feel the mechanic steps that they're doing, and it's just smooth. Um, so yeah, it's I know it helped them immensely, and he also I don't know made a very good friend during that sort of restructuring
Okay.
period.
So this was on a. How big was the team that was doing this refactoring project?
I think it was just Daniel and another guy. The
Okay.
team though was between 7 and 10, but they set out to do this sort of as a task force to do this restructuring.
Do you find that the Mikado method works better when you're working alone, or when you're
Mm.
working on a team, or maybe both, or just as good?
The sort of the steps that you want to take goes a lot faster if you work as a team. And the visualization of what you're trying to achieve helps immensely because you know if you're taking a step in the wrong direction or the correct direction. When you look at the graph and say, okay, am I going to decide to do this class, move this method this way or that way? And you look at the graph and say, okay, we're trying to achieve this. Okay, it's obvious what we're trying to do. So
Nice.
if I usually say if you want to travel fast, you travel alone. If you want to travel over a long period of time, you travel together. Um, I think you can go faster working with the Mikado method alone, but I don't think you it's not as sustainable.
I remember in the book you talk about using the Mikado method, or the chart. You could almost turn each node into like its own user story or its own
Yeah,
post-it note to really parallelize the work as well, right?
yeah. Uh,
Assuming there are no unmet dependencies, of course, on the
right.
graph. But
Yeah.
then it's completely obvious looking at the graph if that's the case or not.
Yeah. It's I think if you want to sort of parallelize work, that's how you should do it. You're trying to achieve a sort of a bigger goal, and then you're achieving sub goals or prerequisites. What's interesting though, when you visualize stuff, people that are not very used to programming, they walk by the Mikado graph and usually sparks their attention. It's like, what's this? What's this
Hmm.
huge thing doing on the wall? Well, this is where we are now, and you can sort of maybe have a little avatar there. It's like, okay, that's me. Okay, what you're doing? I'm doing this. We're preparing for that. Oh, is that's why it's taking so long? Well, yeah, that's why.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to sort of negotiate on the sort of the functionality here, we can cut all this. Oh, let's
Hmm.
do that. Let's do that. So you
That's
can,
that's amazing. I never thought of Mikado in that regard. That you could use it as sort of as a negotiation tool with stakeholders, for
mm,
example.
mm,
That's
yeah,
that's really nice.
yeah. That's one of my finest hours. I I saved a lot of money that way. Maybe even earned a lot of money negotiating with a product owner. I think it was 7, 8 years ago, and it was super easy to uh, to make a calculation of that. And we were trying to go live uh, with a special type of save account, so we could work for a bank at that time, and we could sort of lower the interest on one account, but open another account as a. But the sooner we could open the new account type, we could lower the interest on one account and having due to regulations that sort of extra account. And I said initially, maybe we can go live in 6 months. And then we had a conversation, and it's okay, okay, can you guarantee this? Can you guarantee that? I was like, no, I can't. But look at this, and I sort of drew up the graph and said, okay, this is what the code looks like today, and this is what we need to do. If we sort of uh, we skip out on this functionality, I think we can go live in 3 weeks. And he was like, 3 weeks? Are you kidding me?
Wow.
He pulled out his HP calculator, like, Ola, do you know this is 3 millions? 3 millions. We can save 3 millions by doing that. It's like, okay, well, it's an easy decision then.
Yeah.
It was.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah.
So I can see this being a useful tool during, say, sprint planning if you're doing Scrum,
Hmm.
and you set your sprint goal, and that could be the center of your graph, and then you
Hmm.
could from there work out. Maybe you already have some of the stories in your backlog, but certainly you could put them on the graph and really decide how you're going to do your sprint, or if your sprint goal is even reasonable in the time frame given. Uh, Sounds like a really good. I'd never thought of it as a project management tool in that
Yeah.
sense, but it sounds like it really is. I
me,
mean,
me,
obviously it is when you think about it, but
yeah. Me
yeah.
neither. I remember when I realized this. I was standing at a platform on the subway. And I was like, oh my God, uh, we can turn actual sort of user requirements or whatever into, well, it sort of explodes into sub stories in a sense. I was like, okay, I just need to tell someone about this. And when I do, or when I told people, it's like, yeah, well, yeah, but it's a list, but it's not a list. It's because it has sub uh, requirements. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, you're right. Yeah. So another colleague, a friend of mine, he used it to renovate his old house.
Uh-huh. I wanted to ask you about that. How can you apply this to non-software projects?
Yeah.
So
Well, I've
that's a
seen
good
it.
one.
I've seen it applied to, or no, I haven't seen it applied to. I've seen it, heard it described, sort of in by Sandy Mamoli, a friend from New Zealand. She did the organizational restructuring this way. It's There's an interesting story she wrote on a blog post. I can send you the link later, but
Yeah, great.
she has very good insights on how to do it on an organizational level. My friend, he renovated his house. I've been planning parties this way.
Okay.
and also big sort of, I don't know, tasks that seems to go on and on forever, and then you
Uh-huh.
lose track of, why am I here? Oh yeah, it was that sort of that old piece of furniture that I wanted to do something with, but then you lose track.
Yes. One of my first YouTube videos, it's a very embarrassingly low quality video, but one of my first YouTube videos is about the Mikado method. It was based on a presentation I did at the place I was working at the time. And my promise to get people to come to my presentation was that it could improve your sex appeal.
Yeah, I
So,
remember that. I've seen it. I think it's one of the sort of the, what do you call it, the bait and switch
yes.
tricks ever applied using the Mikado method. So I constantly
Yeah.
think about that.
I don't know if it actually worked for anybody to do that, but that was that, like you said, it was bait and switch. Definite clickbait. Have you ever experienced, whether it's individuals or teams, that have struggled with the Mikado method, and why?
Oh, yeah. The first struggle is usually in the revert. People do not want to throw away stuff. I've heard it several times, and it usually comes in the form of, okay, well, maybe we could stash it and reapply it, and maybe you can, but it's such the thought process. It's what's hard, uh, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But so the first struggle is the revert, the trying to come over the fact that hard work was put into transforming the code in or the text into one form or the other. I think the thought process behind it is the work, and then you remember it. Uh, the other thing is the, what do you call it, the, in the beginning, I think you need to be very deliberate about the steps, and you need to learn how to break down your tasks. From what I heard in the beginning here of this recording is that you sort of do what I do. You do it in your head.
Mm-hmm.
But in the beginning, you need to be very deliberate and about how to um, chunk your work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the two sort of big hurdles. People also tend to not want to, if it's a tool, if the Mikado graph is in a tool, they want to keep it. They want to keep the sort of in a data hoarding way,
Mm-hmm.
keep the the graph. But if it's on a whiteboard, it's a lot easier to just erase stuff, and
Yeah.
it is more, yeah. So that's the big ones that I've come across. And also, we can't do the Mikado method because we don't have appropriate tests. We don't know how to restructure, and I just like go, okay, so how do you restructure today?
Mm-hmm. And do they? Do they have an answer to that one?
Well, they just, okay, oh, yeah, well, you're, of course you're right, we could use the Mikado method, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. So you talked about tools. What tools? Obviously, you can use a whiteboard or a piece of
Yeah.
paper. Are there online tools, especially now that we're in this remote working, hybrid working sort of stage of the universe? What tools do you recommend if you want to do this remotely?
uh, if you work asynchronously, if you're not online at the same time, you could use GraphViz and
Hmm.
commit your GraphViz files in the same repository as you use the code. Or you can
Hmm.
use, there's an online tool. It's not very evolved yet. We're trying to figure out how to sort of make money out of it, but I don't think we can. But there's a tool on the Mikado Method info site.
Hmm.
I can also send you the link to that. You
Good.
can also download the tool. It has no the Mikado Graph has no real sort of um, memory, so we don't guarantee that. But if you run it locally, it uses your web browser's local storage.
So you've been I don't know how long you've been doing the Mikado method, but you wrote about it almost 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Presumably, you've been using it for longer than that.
yeah. I think it sort of came into the, yeah. Well, I think the sort of the birth of the method was at that presentation with Daniel and I was in Gothenburg 2010, I think it was. No, it was before that. It was maybe 2009 when we did the presentation. Before that, we struggled. At least we had a practical problem when we came up with this solution or this method. Maybe 2008. Before that, I I don't know what I was doing. I but it was way bigger the restructuring that we initially thought. So maybe I've sort of worked this way more or less since 2008, 9.
Hmm.
Um, it has modified a bit since. I'm not as formal uh, with the drawing unless I want to share it with someone or
Hmm.
I know this is going to take a long, long time.
Hmm.
In fact, I come to think of it, on the back side of a whiteboard at work now, there's a huge graph that I haven't sort of looked at for a while. But it's there in my mind. I know that I can cross off, I can sort of erase some nodes there now, but it's been running for 2 years.
Okay. Okay. What have you learned in the process, and especially since the book has come out? What new revelations have you had about this?
One of the big things is how early decisions. But this has more to do about code, and then I'll sort of hop into Mikado Method specific stuff. But code lives a lot longer than I initially sort of expected to.
Hmm.
Maybe this code will just live for, I don't know, 3 months, but it doesn't. It's like 3 years, and then it's 5 years. But when it comes to the Mikado Method, I've learned, I've sort of got confirmed that how much I love visualizing stuff and point at stuff when I talk about it. If it's not visual, if I can visualize it to someone, either drawing up a picture in their mind or drawing up a picture in front of their face, I have a hard time talking about things. So it has to be concrete in some form, and I think the Mikado method helps me a lot there. It's also it helps me as a person focus as well, lose track. So it helps me relax. And I also learned that uh, talking about new ways of working takes a lot of energy for not for I can describe the Mikado method in a few minutes, but actually getting through and getting someone to sort of get get the full benefits of something, you need to practice it and really in a deliberate way.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true with so many things, isn't it? Just
Yeah.
learning the rules to checkers are easy, but mastering the game can take a lifetime.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I don't want to force some stuff onto people. I don't want to coerce people into using something they don't see value in. And I think that's sort of a neither me nor Daniel wants to coerce people into things. And you could argue that marketing is sort of trying to convince people that okay, this has some use, but eh, so maybe that's why the Mikado method hasn't had a huge spread, or at least I tell myself that. Maybe it's not.
How has the reception been, by the way? Before we started recording, you were talking a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, it's two polar opposites really, or maybe three. It's one that's like myself and other people like, wow, this is really useful, and some people it's like, well, it's sort of to the useful, but it's like, okay, this is very natural. How can this even be a method? That's my style of working. I've
Okay.
always done this. I knew this before, long before the first demo tape. And there's the other like aspect. Why bother? I have my style. This is not useful.
Hmm.
So um, it's um, it's so ingrained in my work. So it's a part of my style. So I can. It's very useful to me. Maybe it's not even the Mikado method anymore. Maybe it's I've eaten up the Mikado method and become it's a
Or something
part of
else.
my uh, of Ola now. I don't know.
Yeah. The 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 method is deceptively simple, and I mean I've read a number of books that talk about something simple. I mean I'll even pick on Kent Beck here. His book Test Driven Design or Test Driven Development by example
Mm?
is an example in my mind of a method that needs about 3 pages worth of explanation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the surface, you might think the same about the Mikado method, but honestly, I enjoyed the whole book. I
Okay.
didn't feel like one chapter in, I was like, okay, now I'm done.
Okay.
I, of course, that's me. I don't know what anybody else. I can't speak for anyone
Uh,
else, but I felt like it was a benefit to read the entire book.
yeah,
It's
I'm
not a
happy.
long book anyway, but it was a nice thing to read. So
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. I was going through the book yesterday and sort of trying to see if there's something that I'm not very fond of, or but I'm very glad that you say that. Some of the critique that we've had is that it's a long book. It's too long. It's actually just, yeah, you can explain it in just a page. Why is this even a book? Okay, well, uh, come to think of it, me and Daniel had a long conversation about it. We wanted to structure the book that so you can stop reading at any minute
hmm
and have something sort of gotten something out of the book. And that's sort of how we wanted to structure the book. Uh, Having said that, a sort of there's a hidden gem there, but it's very rough, I think. It's about technical depth. It's in the appendix A, I think. Uh,
hmm
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's sort of a framing problem. Maybe it's not about technical debt. It's about where change comes from. And I read that yesterday again, and I really enjoyed that part. And that's usually how I talk about big structural change or changes with stakeholders. So, okay, so now you're sort of asking us to do this, which has this impact, and uh, change that comes from the inside of a technical kind. I know how to deal with this. I know how to sort of try to avoid that and steer away from that. And that was the purpose of that chapter, was really to put people's attention to where does all this stuff come from that's in my way all the time.
that's good. So that leads me to what might be my final question. If you were to make a second edition of the book, what would be different?
I think maybe more examples with dynamic lit type languages. I don't know. That's some critique that we had, even though there's an appendix. I wanted to sort of point on this sort of the non-technical aspects of the Mikado method, how you can use it as a product owner or a project planner or something like that. And maybe it's not, but there I think there's a follow-up book, or at least in my head there is, where instead of talking about just about software development, it's something that I call sort of active stewardship, active software stewardship, where you go from a sort of function factory where you sort of develop functions to software system stewardship, where you develop stuff, where you maintain stuff, and when you retire code and data, which is a sort of been a huge insight for me, that if when I retire code and functionality, the rest of the stuff becomes simpler. If we when we add stuff, it becomes more complex. And I said, okay, what's the opposite of that? Well, it's a retiring code and retiring data. So maybe there's something there about retiring stuff.
Sounds good. I'll read it.
Yeah. Yes, we have one reader. Yeah, that's fine. That's great. Maybe you should write it. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Well, Ola, it's been fun. Of course, we'll have a link to the book for anybody who hasn't read it and wants to get a copy.
Yep.
Um, how can people get in touch with you or follow what you're doing and find out when this new book comes out?
Well, they could. I'm at Twitter still. It's just my last name. It's at Ellnestam. I'm there not a lot, but a couple of times a day. So you reach me through Twitter. You can also hook up with me on LinkedIn. It's Ola Ellnestam. There's only one with that person with that name in the world. You can also send an email to me, ola@agical.se. And yeah, it's sometimes I'm busy, but if you reach out to me, I will certainly respond to you. I love talking about code and the Mikado method and stuff like that, technical questions.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off for today?
No, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks for sort of being so very friendly and yeah, it's I feel a lot more energized talking about the Mikado method now. And a huge thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Like I said early on, it's a book that I've enjoyed, so it's a real pleasure, personal pleasure, to talk to you about the book. Encourage everybody to read it. Thank you for listening or watching today. Until next time.